Hello and welcome to the last word on Spurs. We are, of course, your multi-award winning Tottenham Hotspur podcast. We're back during a very, very quiet. Nothing much has happened. International break. If you're with us for the first time, you can find us on iTunes. We're on Spotify. We're across all major audio platforms. We're, of course, on X. We're on Facebook, Blue Sky and Instagram too. Back alongside me, he's with me more now than what he has been during a lot of last season and this season so far. And look how happy he is to be here. Jason McGovern is back. Jace, how are you, mate? Lovely to have you back alongside us.
Not too bad, mate. Enjoyed watching England for a change tonight, and looking forward to speaking to Tom.
Absolutely. Delighted to have Tom back on here, and we'll bring obviously Tom in just a second. But look, some news in terms of the international scene. I know people have regard us, we don't do much international coverage on here or international feedback on here. Congratulations to Jed Spence, who made his England debut. And in doing so, became the first Muslim player to make an England appearance. He came on with 25 minutes to go in England's 5-0 win over Serbia. Spence's debut means that Spurs have now had more England internationals than any other club. 80. We hope for more to come for, of course, England and Spurs. So congratulations to Jed on that. Back on the show. It feels like he's not been here for a while. You know, we normally catch up with these wonderful people during the transfer windows of January and the summer. But in true typical Tottenham fashion, everything always feels like a soap drama. Whenever we bring somebody on, it's fair to say Spurs never stop going. We've got the wonderful senior football writer at The Sun, part of the Tottenham Way podcast on YouTube too. Please make sure you're liking and subscribing to him over there. Tom Barkley is back. Tom, lovely to have you here. How are you?
I'm good, Ricky. Thanks for having me on. We were laughing before we came on how obviously I've got this book out which you'll come on to, and how you said, oh, this will be a great time in international break when nothing's really going on, where we can talk, really get into it. And then wallop, Daniel Levy leaves, and then obviously today Ange Postecoglou gets a new job. So I don't know whether that makes it really timely or instantly makes the book have either the ending it should have had is actually not in it because it's already gone to print before both of those events happened. But either way, delighted to be here, guys.
Bless you, mate, and likewise, lovely to have you here. And it's, look, true Tottenham fashion that really anything that does come out or be published is outdated within 24 hours. It feels like right now anything that is said instantly then almost becomes irrelevant following the next 24 hours of Tottenham news. And look, for those out there that are intrigued and want to get a copy of that book, we're going to have a good chat about that throughout the show, but of course give you an update of everything around Tottenham right now. It's an under-the-skin chronicle of Tottenham Hotspur's historic 24-25 season from Tom, obviously a national press reporter who was there to witness every astonishing twist and turn. It's perfect for any Spurs fan that, of course, absolutely loved our campaign, of course, in that unforgettable European journey, which saw Spurs clinch their first European trophy in over 17 years, ending a trophy drought. Tom was there to witness it all along the way, of course, there. And with Ange Postecoglou in most of the presses, as we relive a lot of moments in there. And look, we will also give you an opportunity to win a copy of the book. And we'll come on to later on how you can do that. Because like I say, there'll be a question that you've got to listen to this show in full to do so. But I mean, it's funny, Tom, isn't it? Like you just mentioned there, the book is going to be released very, very soon. Manager is no longer there. And the chairman has stepped down. I mean, there can't be too many authors that produce books where that kind of thing happens in the space of a summer before the book even comes out. I mean, is that just true Tottenham fashion, Tom?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, to be fair, Ange's exit at Spurs was what is in there and is a big part of how it all plays out. But I have to say, as you guys might come on to, I had really no inclination that Daniel Levy would be going. Every sort of source that I spoke to and just the general feeling would be that he would be here for a long time, which I think if you watched Vinai Venkatesham's, what I thought actually was excellent interview the other day, even he was suggesting he was expecting to be working with him for many years to come, let alone a few months. So unfortunately, that bit is instantly outdated, but such is life, I suppose, and it sort of underlines how much of a shock exit that ended up being. But I still think, personally, to sort of give a bit of background behind the book, it is a sort of boots on the ground kind of chronicle of the season. Yes, a lot of your readership and viewership will be familiar with nigh on every sort of part of it, albeit I hope there is a bit of fresh insight over, decisions that were made or transfers that were pursued and ones that didn't come off, for example. But I saw it as a chance to, chronicle and put into a book this amazing moment, which we don't know how long it will be before it happens again. Obviously, it was 17 years before the last time they won a trophy, 41 years before the last time they won in Europe. And, quite a lot of people have picked up on the title, Miracle in Bilbao, normally rival fans, normally Man United fans, to be honest, playing it down. I do sort of understand it to a certain extent, but there is a sort of double meaning, isn't it? It's not just sort of the joy of the miracle of winning, but it was also how badly the Premier League season went and all the problems that came with it, and the fact that he was still in post come the final and then went to win it. That's kind of the sort of dual meaning there behind that title.
Yeah, it starts to say interesting by that fact in itself, kind of how much, like we say, last season took out of a lot of us, but we had that amazing week in Bilbao that we'll never ever forget. And again, we're here on this show here. Can I just say this? I had a joke with Jason earlier. This is our birthday show, and we didn't realise it. This was to the day in which we recorded 8 years ago, Jace, after we beat Everton. Harry's 100, was it? Harry's 100th goal. It's I think over 2,500 episodes we've done of last one on Spurs. 1,500 of them were on audio, and then we showed our faces on YouTube. What were we thinking of? What were we thinking of doing? But it's fair to say, I think Tottenham's aged a lot of us during that time. But look, it's been obviously that great moment we had, of course, last season. I know we want more of it. We most certainly want more of it. I mean, look, Tom, we have to get your thoughts, actually. Give us your feeling about, let's talk about Daniel Levy. Let's start with that, and we'll come on to, of course, the manager that was behind, obviously, Tottenham's triumph in the Europa League and where he's at now. But how surprised was you with regards to Daniel's departure for the club? Because you kind of mentioned it in your intro there. You were really quite surprised. So give us your intrigue on that, and we'll get Jason to come in with regards to his response to that and let you take it away, Tom.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I'll give you a bit of an idea of what my day was like the day Daniel Levy left the club. I was in the office. I'm in the office once a week at the moment. It was a pretty quiet day. I forget what I was working on, but it was more of a piece for the weekend, which shows you how little sort of news was going on during international break. And I was just getting ready to leave around 6 o'clock, and then bang, absolutely massive news. And this, let's be honest, it's about as bombshell and as big news as you'll get in the Tottenham world, and beyond that in the footballing world overall. Someone who, as my good friend Tom Allnut on the Tottenham Way podcast we did recently pointed out, it has a similarity to Sir Alex Ferguson or Arsene Wenger leaving, not in the sense obviously that they were super successful winning loads of trophies, but they're just such massive figures in the sort of relatively recent history of their club. And I think Daniel Levy, whatever you think about him, has a similar status and sort of dominates the thoughts of pretty much everyone Spurs related over the last 25 years. So to see him go was massive. And like I said, speaking to lots of people throughout and, dealing with the club on a regular basis, I really didn't get the sense, I don't think anyone else did really, that this was going to happen. Even when you look at the interview that Daniel Levy did with Vinai Venkatesham at the sort of in the June period after deciding to dispense with Ange and bring in Frank, and he obviously had, there you go, you got the image right there, and he had the sort of line towards the end about wanting to win the Premier League and the Champions League, which felt, to be honest, a little bit tin-eared given they just won a Europa League trophy. So let's try and revel in that a little bit. And also, how likely is it straight away that they're going to go and win those competitions? But whatever, at the time, it felt very much like he was here to sort of try and deliver that in the coming years. And then this happened. And that night, I spent a lot of time, speaking to people, and it soon emerged that it wasn't a sort of resignation from his point of view. It was a forcing out, really, from the Lewis family, this new generation of the Lewis family. Sounds the younger generation. It sounds weird saying the younger generation, seeing as Viv Lewis, as we're supposed to call her, and Charlie are in their 60s, but they're obviously the younger generation of that family compared to Joe Lewis, and that they want to go a different direction. And yeah, it's one of those ones where I think Spurs fans, even though I've only been covering the club for sort of 3.5 years now, albeit I've been at pretty much everything throughout that period. I've been there for the protests and all that stuff.
Yep.
I'm so aware of how fans feel towards him, and how not everyone, but to be honest, the majority or a big proportion of Spurs fans have wanted to see him leave. That when it actually happens in such shock circumstances, they just don't really know what to do with themselves, because it's just hard to know how to react. And I think Spurs fans are still probably in that kind of mindset at the moment, trying to quite believe it's true, what it all means. What does it mean going forward? Like Marcus Buckland on our podcast even said that he felt kind of strange about it because he's been calling for it effectively for a while. But, for all his deficiencies, he felt like with Levy at the helm, there was at least a certain sense of safety, even if you knew there were sort of
financially
limitations over how he did things. And now it's just the sort of slight fear of the unknown, albeit ironically not the unknown, because it's the same owners that have been there longer than any other Premier League owner.
That's the thing, isn't it, Jace? I mean, look, I know you've been with me for a lot of the Levy shows that we've done, but obviously one thing we haven't asked you about is the fact that since the Vinai Venkatesham interview, I think many have been quite happy to see there be quite clear, you'd say, communication that we've had. And to be fair, it's actually the most I think we've ever seen somebody of a true hierarchy level at Tottenham be questioned to such detail, where he actually was name checking people, the Lewis family, that are involved right now. I mean, there's been some skeptics about that interview, to be fair, with Vinai. Your takeaways from that, Jace? I mean, I think what I'm hearing in terms of a lot of people's feelings is, well, why after 25 years do they want to get involved now? Where have they been for the previous 24? And why only now are they rearing their head to want to get involved? How do you respond to that?
Well, there was two parts of the interview to me. When he said that he was expecting to come in and work with Daniel for a long time, the information we had would suggest that he probably knew on day one that wasn't the case. So I was sceptical of that line when he said it, and that immediately makes you sceptical then of the rest of it. But that's the thing, isn't it? What is this trigger that suddenly changed the family's mind? As you say, we're not talking about two kids that have just become 21 and 23. You're talking about people that have been in and around the club, and it's been in that family for 25, or what is it, 25 years now, or whatever, 24 years, 25 years. So what has suddenly changed, and just how much is that desire to actually carry out a club in the manner that they now indicate that it is? And only time will tell. We won't see much of that, I don't think, until next summer. That is there a genuine idea we want to win more and win more often? But we have to just go with what they're saying at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, what's quite interesting in the last 24 hours, what we're hearing is that the Lewis family could invest more money into the club to make sure they can challenge consistently for major honours. And the owners are committed to the club, despite there being at least two groups of investors interested in buying Spurs. And that we did obviously bring you that show earlier in the week with regards to there being Enix confirming two bids being firmly rejected. Obviously, one from former Newcastle United shareholder Amanda Staveley's PCP International Finance Limited, the other from an Asian consortium led by Dr. Roger Kennedy and Wingfei NG through Firehawk Holdings Limited. I mean, Tom, you can probably understand our element of skepticism, bearing in mind, we've followed this club for, combine me and Jason, too many years. I mean, what's your gauge on it for you? Do you think they're eyeing up a sale in the immediate future, or do you not get that vibe by what's being fed to you as journalists that are fairly close to the club? And again, someone like you that does go week in, week out to the pressers and is briefed by Tottenham.
Yeah, I can totally understand your skepticism after all this time. And maybe there's an element of, can this be too good to be true? And having those sort of, having your guard up, I suppose, to a certain extent. And I totally get it. The idea that that is essentially the same owners after all this time. So why the change? And I think we're all still asking ourselves that as journalists, let alone you guys who are fans. But all I can say is, when speaking to sources close to the Lewis family, I don't know, other journalists have as well, you've probably seen this throughout, but my first sort of question on that Thursday night when speaking to them was, I'm hearing, I've heard, and there's obviously a lot of rumors, but I have heard from, other sources, let alone just sort of chatter. And it doesn't mean to say that they're right, but that this could be the sort of preamble to a sale. But that evening they were very strong on saying no. And I'm not the only one. Other journalists at our place as well had similar information. Everyone speaks to different people, so that's not to say that's not the case. And also kind of like what you were saying with Jason with Vinai, I'm not going to question his how genuine he was being, but I suppose you were kind of suggesting that the information you'd heard was different to what he was suggesting about not knowing that Levy was going to go early this summer. I'm going to choose to believe that that's what he thought. But I suppose the point being is like what someone says publicly versus what might be the case can sometimes differ. But I've had it sort of reiterated over and over again in the sort of the day since the Levy news that it's not for sale. But I did write this the other day, and I think Matt Law did as well, of the Telegraph, that I still am expecting investment to come in. They still after investment, and it's likely, to my mind, that will be internal, so probably from the ENIC family, and I wouldn't be surprised if it was a sort of £100 million mark. But I suppose it also, to caveat it all, it's the same as anything, isn't it? How houses, if someone makes a bid for your house, maybe you accept it if it's something you feel like you can't turn down. If someone comes in with a £4 billion offer, I'm not going to go and say this will never happen, because you're going to look stupid if suddenly they change their mind. But the noises from the Lewis family camp consistently in the last 5 days or whatever it's been have been it's not for sale, and they're not looking for any of this stuff. So unless proved otherwise, I think you've got to go with that.
I mean, look, also, Tom, when we go back to the window, I mean, we did see a change in, profile of targets go up. I mean, look, we didn't get Eze over the line or Morgan Gibbs-White over the line. Obviously, those were the two real high-profile ones that didn't come off. But obviously, with the club bringing in the likes of, as we've discussed previously, the likes of Polina, bringing in the likes of Xavi Simons, very exciting player, Kolo Muani on the final day. These are players typically you'd say Tottenham would find it maybe hard to get in other windows. So did you see that? I mean, again, with the links of Savinho, for example, even that profile of player from a Manchester City that really, I've said before with Tottenham, we seem to target players from clubs that are quite opportunistic. I mean, the Kudus one, for example, West Ham needed to sell him due to PSR. I look back at Johnson again. Forest needed to sell him due to PSR. Everton, of course, with Richarlison, I go back. And Maddison, you can go back and look at a lot of Tottenham's previous signings, and it feels like there's been an opportunistic approach to all of them. Maybe Jason might disagree there. We'll come in on that in a second. But do you feel that you saw actually a different tack from Tottenham in the summer with regards to the calibre of players they were moving for, which is different to what they have done previously?
Not really, actually. You kind of made my argument for me. I think they learned the lessons. Or I suppose your question is, did you notice something different that would suggest a whole sea change from the ownership? I think more there was a difference to the summer before, where I think lessons were learned over the over-reliance on young players. Obviously, they brought in Solanke, they brought in Werner, which proved to be a disastrous loan. But overall, generally, they went for, as you put there, Lucas Bergvall, Archie Gray, who are no doubt, really good young talents. But I think it was proved throughout the season how they went a bit too heavy on lack of experience with the European campaign. I think they learned a bit from that, particularly going to the Champions League this summer by bringing in more experienced faces. But the word you use, opportunistic, I see that in pretty much all of their signings this summer still. You mentioned Kudus already, so I don't need to make that argument about West Ham needing to sell, but Paulinho was a loan. Xavi Simons, by all the information I've got, Leipzig wanted to let him go and we're looking to move him on this summer. So that doesn't mean he's not a good player, and he could well be an absolutely fantastic player and a brilliant bit of business, and it works really, really well for Spurs. But it's not like prizing someone, to my mind, from a club that were desperate to keep hold of him and they had to really go over the odds. I think Leipzig weren't willing to move him on this summer. So again, that felt kind of opportunistic. And then Kolo Muani, we all know last January how heavily they were in for him. So kind of the legwork was done there already. He didn't really have any future at PSG. There's a good relationship between PSG and Spurs generally, between when Daniel Levy was at the club, between Levy and the owner at PSG. And you cannot say that for every club. going, and that's another thing that we talked about recently in our own podcast about Levy's sort of legacy and how much, arguably maybe to their detriment at times, Tottenham, the way he would negotiate deals whilst it could get some very good fees for the club and bring in some good players. I do think there were times where clubs just didn't want to deal with Spurs at times. So you then look at the clubs where they have dealt with Tottenham, and do they keep going back to those clubs? And I would argue that PSG, albeit I can't think of many other signings they've made, but generally that relationship seems to be okay. Bayern Munich, definitely, obviously Paulinho, and then the other two moves felt a little bit opportunistic. The one, ironically, the one that has made me wonder about a particular change is actually Christian Romero's new contract. I don't know what he's on before anyone asks about the money that he might be earning, but I presume it's got to be like one, if not the highest earner. But this is a guy who, it's not so much, well, I mean, there may well be something to do with the money he might be on, but if we ever found out, that might indicate a sea change when it comes to the wages, because we all know relatively Spurs have paid less on wages compared to their competitors, hence the 42% to wage to turnover statistic. But this is a guy that by all accounts, I think, was agitating for a move last season. Now, maybe had Atletico stumped up the money that Spurs might have felt acceptable, he might well have been on his way, and it would have felt like the same as it ever was. And so it's not to say that suddenly something happened internally that made him change completely. It might just be the fact that move was never really on, because Spurs were never going to accept whatever Atletico offered. And so he decided to stay. But I don't know, it's quite to convince him to sign a new contract when he's got 2 years left. Power is increasingly coming into his hands. Spurs generally in the Levy period don't generally let players run down their contracts, or at least players who they really want to make some money on. Harry Kane being a prime example. So he would have been in a really powerful position next summer if he couldn't leave now. And yet he signed a new deal and obviously made captain and seems very happy. So that would be the one that, I'm not saying I know anything about that, but that's the one that sort of pricked my ears up a little bit more, rather than the individual other signings that they brought into the club.
Yeah, I know, Jace, you made this point actually, previously, that it's going to be difficult for them in January really to be able to go out there and really flex their muscles in the market, because again, the situations around the squad registration, both in terms of Premier League and the Champions League. But obviously one area they could, I think, again, we did touch upon this before, is maybe you look at our situation around players that are due maybe an extension or an improvement to their salary, the likes of Pedro Porro, Mickey van der Ven. Do you still feel, Jace, for you, those are going to be the areas that they can show the fans in the kind of the immediate future, if the Lewis family is serious about being here for the long term? That's where they can show fans they are serious by trying to tie down what I think Tottenham fans would argue some of the most important players in the squad, Jace.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, Mickey's one is a key. I think Mickey's still got 3 years to run, so in terms of time, it's not a problem. But I think his reported wage is something like 50 grand a week. Well, we know if Mickey was to go to any club tomorrow, he'd get a hell of a lot more than that. So you certainly can't, if you leave Mickey van der Ven on 50 grand a week for the next 2 years, you're going to get loads and loads of speculation, and you're going to get a player that will eventually agitate for the move. So he's a young player. We want to have Mickey for the next 5 or 6 years. For me, he should, after Romero got the captaincy, I'd like to see Mickey get the vice captaincy. So, and I think, you can't be running for another 18 months, 2 years with Mickey on 50 grand a week, because clubs will come knocking in January, and they'll certainly come knocking after the World Cup. So that's definitely one that's got to be done. And you're probably looking at having to at least treble that figure. Otherwise, there's always going to be interest from top clubs elsewhere. And you want to head that interest off. You don't want to be going into the summer with speculation about Mickey's future. So absolutely, Mickey's one is crucial. Probably Pedro Porro's is another one where I think his reported salary is something like 75. But, they're the figures that, what's a top rated right back in the Premier League now. So we can't be taking players on wages like that, as obscene as it is to us as fans, the money they're earning. If you can earn 150 grand a week from 12, 13 other clubs, why are you going to take 50 grand a week from one?
I even saw like Bentancur. I mean, coming over to you, Tom, on Rodrigo Bentancur, there was a lot of moments in the summer that he was viewed as quite an important player to Frank. I think Frank probably come out and said he was looking forward to working with Bentancur. Are you surprised, Tom, from how it feels there's been no real update or certainly, brought to us as fans in relation to his contract? You'd imagine this one, you'd like to think, is going to be dealt with in the imminent future. What's your gauging out for you, Tom? Have you heard anything at all behind the scenes about Bentancur and what comes next for him? Because it feels Basuma will be going out the door, whether it's at the end of the respective international window where there appears to be potential interest from Fenerbahce, but at the same time, nothing concrete as things stand, Tom.
I'm still expecting Bentancur to sign a new contract. I take it back to what I said before about Spurs generally not letting players run down their deals, particularly if they can, if they're really sort of big assets. I mean, Basuma is a slightly different case because of the season he had, albeit it ended triumphantly, and he played a key role. But Bentancur, he's really good mates with Romero. So I think from a sort of the fact that he's staying bodes well for his of Bentancur's chances of staying as well. So at this stage, I'm still quite expectant that he would sign a new deal, and he's very much in Thomas Frank's plans.
It's interesting.
I think I was going to say with Bentancur, I mean, you're right, Tommy. It is unusual to go into the last 12 months, but I think if you look back, and your book highlights a number of the issues, most of the time you discuss it with 2 years to go. But let's remember, 2 years ago, Rodrigo had the ACL injury, and we weren't sure how he was going to come back. He had an incredibly stop-start season, didn't he? Then got injured against Villa again. Had that head injury against Liverpool that kept him out. Then he served 7-game bans or 8-game ban because of the race question, if you like. So there were so many questions about Bentancur. Would it be publicly great idea for the club right in the middle of the race question, whatever the rights or wrongs of that are from our point of view, can you be seen to be giving somebody who's got that charge hanging over his head a brand new contract for 150 grand a week for 5 years when they don't know what's going to happen? So I think there were so many issues around Bentancur at the time of when you'd be looking to discuss a contract. I can understand why that one's ended up going much further down the line.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think PR and the timing of things can often be quite crucial. That's not to say that I know he's signed a new deal and they're just waiting to release it. I don't know on that, but you're right. I think there were times last season where it would have felt a little bit insensitive or the wrong timing. But take yourself back to Thomas Frank's first interview after becoming Tottenham manager, and he referenced Bentancur along with a couple of other players of how as potentially key players. I mean, how much you can read specifically into that, but it'd be quite strange really to name check someone if they weren't in your plans. And I think his team selection so far have shown that he's relying on him. And I think for all the stop-start nature of his career, and obviously the Sonny situation was unforgivable. Really, he had an absolute terrible situation. He's obviously had bad injuries, but when he's at the top of his game, I still think he's a really elegant player who brings a lot to the party and a lot of experience. So I can see why, on the pitch perspective, they would want to keep him there.
We also, don't forget, the bottle incident into the crowds and things like that. So, it wasn't just the race issue with it. And like I say, without judging the merits of it, when you've got a player that could be banned for race, could be banned for bottle throwing, it's a bit hard to justify giving him a brand new contract when he's also not up to speed because of an ACL injury.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, going back to when I was doing the book, there were certain moments that I'd sort of vaguely forgotten about, and that would be one of them, the bottle throwing incident where he got basically a 4-game international ban from what he did for Uruguay at the Copa America, wasn't it? And yeah, I definitely think you can question some of his decision making, albeit that incident felt like it's clearly like a really sort of heat of the moment, raucous situation. I'm not excusing it, but that's kind of seems like where that's sort of born out of what happened there. I don't think you can really defend the situation with what happened with Son. But yeah, so the more I think about it, you've kind of just explained it in a way, Jason, that made me think, yeah, there might have been various moments last season, had they really wanted to push the button, it just felt like the wrong timing. And I do also think with players coming back from major injury, they need to sort of prove it over a consistent basis before clubs really make these massive financial commitments going forward. I mean, I think of someone like before I was covering Spurs, I was doing a bit more Palace, and I remember Eze, not to bring him up now because I know Spurs fans don't want to hear about him, but he got an Achilles injury. He came back after 5 months, which was absolutely rapid for an Achilles injury, but really he wasn't back fit and playing at his best for like another 6 months at least after that. And this is the worry, I guess, with James Maddison of where he's going to be, at what point is he going to be back at his best within his own contract at Spurs in his career. We obviously hope he can be one of those players who comes back quickly, but when you look at how he came back with the ankle ligaments, it took him a really long time to get back into the swing of things. It didn't really happen at all. I would argue pretty much the rest of that season, even when he was playing for a few months. So yeah, maybe that comes into it with Bentancur, but I would argue from a sort of performance perspective, even though there are games, and it was, going through the book, every game as you went along, you think of like Anfield away in the second leg, which was one of the most bruising fixtures of the season.
Yeah.
Look, Liverpool away, even with a 1-0 lead, I think even the most optimistic Spurs fan were probably thinking, oh, this is going to be tricky. And they obviously got blown away, but I thought Bentancur really struggled that night. And for a player of his talent, he could have done much better. And there were a few events like that. In fact, the Villa game, the next game, a few days later in the FA Cup, I thought he was really poor for his standards. So, but having said that, throughout the rest of the season, and particularly in the Europa League run, I think he sort of proved his quality for long enough that a new contract, I mean, just consider what it would take to replace someone of his quality. It would cost a lot of money, wouldn't it? So I'm still expectant that will happen.
Just on that point there, and Jace, I know this is a conversation me and you a lot last season. Obviously, a lot of last season was about judging the manager around his tactics, but also what people didn't seem to judge a lot was about the fact that the players on the pitch should also be taking responsibility. And sometimes it felt last season that maybe the players didn't get enough stick when it came to them going out there and being judged. I mean, when you look back now, I mean, we've had obviously the benefit of going to win the European trophy, but do you feel enough sometimes it's put on players who maybe not doing their jobs when you compare it to what the manager is asking them to do? Because I know that's one thing that is a bugbear of yours. Every manager is judged on the tactics that they ask to set out for the players, but if the players don't follow the tactics, then the manager's a fool guy.
I think that's a problem at all sorts of clubs, not just Tottenham. There's times where we just judge a team and think the players go on the pitch and do everything the manager's told them, which clearly isn't the case. Look at England at the weekend. Did they play as Thomas Tuchel told them to play? It can affect any team in that respect. Did Liverpool play against Arsenal exactly as Slot would have told them, even though they won the game? I doubt it. So not every team plays exactly as it's told to play at the game plan at the start of a game, and things happen within it. But players definitely last season, just shrugged their shoulders far too easily and absolved themselves of any blame, and they hid behind a lot of things. There's no way. I mean, the performance of Wolves was truly abysmal from a number of senior players. Christian Romero at Wolves wasn't told to play as he did. So I think that's a problem in general, but that's not just at Tottenham. It's at all clubs, mate. When a team scores from a corner, do you blame the manager for the tactics, or is it somebody that's not done his job at a corner that lets a goal go in?
Player power, Tom, that's one thing actually we've seen across the summer really becoming quite a big problem in football. Does that concern you, Tom, that it feels, you look back at the summer, the players that kicked up a fuss were the ones that got their moves, the likes of Isak and Visser, and some of the players that really, you'd say, done the things by the book, the likes of Gahey, for example, didn't get his deadline day move? Does that worry you that it feels it's becoming more power for players rather than really for the clubs in hand of those that are the ones that got these guys to a contract?
I think that's often been the case historically, but only for the really elite players who've got that power. I mean, it's often, overlooked how many times clubs, dispense with players easily when they don't want them anymore. So that is always the argument against. But it does feel like there were a few occasions this summer where players threw their toys completely out of the pram. And I did think of Alexander Isak when Jason was talking about Mickey van der Ven having 3 years left, because Isak had 3 years left. You'd think, well, probably the power is all in the club's hands, but if you kick up enough of a fuss, I mean, he really did commit to the kicking up a fuss, though, didn't he? I mean, he made it impossible for Newcastle, if not impossible, then not far off impossible for them to stick with him. And that hopefully is quite rare. But I mean, I was sort of covering Visser situation throughout the summer as well, and speaking to some pretty high level sources at Brentford, and I genuinely, I mean, maybe they weren't being quite truthful or what, and obviously he left in the end, but the feeling I kept getting with them was, no, we'll keep him if we want to, and obviously in the end they let him go because they got replacements in. But so I don't know. I mean, I feel Mark Gahey's a bit hard done by. I do think for the rest of the league, it's nice to see Liverpool not taking every player from all the best players from other teams to make it completely unfair competition. But there does seem to be a bit of a trend there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Look, we are going to go for our first break of the show. For our listeners that are on audio, we've got 5,500 that are watching us live. Guys, thank you ever so much for all your incredible support for Last Word on Spurs. It was billed to be more of a quieter week. It's been anything but that. I'm joined by Jason McGovern. I'm joined by the brilliant Tom Barkley, of course, a senior football writer at The Sun, part of the Tottenham Way podcast. And also on YouTube, you can check Tom out at Tom Barkley. Tom obviously gives you a lot of reaction to press conferences there and in the moment. So obviously he's at pretty much every Spurs press conference. Tom, is that fair to say? I feel like we hear you every Spurs press conference.
Yeah, most of them. Yeah, definitely. I've had, you might recognize me. I'm always in the written section, so that's the embargo section. Probably remember a few of the moments I had with Ange during his time. Some good, some not so good. Remember, was it the Bournemouth game, his second game in charge? And I was the one who asked him about James Maddison being a £45 million bargain, which maybe hasn't aged that well, but at the time felt relevant. And he basically said £45 million bargain. Don't know what world you're living in, mate. But then there was also the last season when I was asking him why does he bother getting embroiled in these spats with fans. Yeah, and he did the whole thing with the phone and explained. And to be honest, I thought he explained it really well.
Great answer.
Yeah. But like that, I notice, I guess, when these things go viral because my mentions go on forever. And then we had Thomas. Obviously, I've only done a few with Thomas Frank so far. I asked him about his no dickheads policy the other day, which you might have picked up on because I think I saw that going around on social media. But I just try and like all the guys, anyone, any journalist, but particularly all the regulars, Ali and George, and Tom Allnut is regularly there, and the other guys, we just try our best most of the time. Well, we always try our best, but to try and get fresh stuff out of the manager, try and ask the questions that you want, sometimes questions that you don't want. That's unfortunately we're not, it doesn't always work the way you will want it that way, but that's what we try and do, and hopefully it brings out some good stuff.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, there'll be people that probably ask you, why can't you ask this? Why can't you ask that? The reality is, it's depending on how you can frame it. This is the thing, isn't it? You can. Yeah,
there's a sort of, I don't know, there's a way of doing things, and you got to remember, we go back every week. So if you create an environment where it's, they're really not going to like you, that will show. Yeah. I think Ange actually showed that unfairly, to be honest, at times last season to one particular organisation because he wasn't happy with one of the stories they'd done. And he kind of like, but when you listen to the answers, if the goal is to try and get them to talk and hopefully try to, shed light on the decisions they make, and that's what we're trying to be, the conduit for the fans to try and get that stuff, understand it a bit better. Then if they just clam up and aren't happy, rightly or wrongly, I think in that situation, I don't know why he did that, but that's not really going to help, and definitely won't give us words to use in our newspapers and on online and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes, you have to be quite diplomatic, but that also doesn't mean, and I think I hope I've got a bit of a good track record of asking some of the difficult questions. Last season when, that period when they kept losing And it was a genuine question. Are Tottenham actually in a relegation battle now? Like, it seems mad, and obviously they were nowhere off at the end. But you look at their points tally, probably should have been. And you know, a lot of people were talking about it, rightly or wrongly, and Ange didn't like that at all. That question, but I asked it anyway. Maybe you guys didn't like it either.
Nor did Jason. Because Jason would come every week saying we're not going to get relegated. I'm thinking just the fact we are having this conversation.
Well, that was the point.
Why are we even having this conversation?
This is madness. We're in a situation where this is actually a topic. But I think it was a legitimate topic. But we're not always going to agree on what is a legitimate topic.
Yeah. Jason is shaking his head in the background.
I think that the one that Tom's probably too polite to say it, but I think it stands out that probably the one that nobody quite likes in the press conferences is the Moose. I think you could definitely see and it's not just Ange that you know, he'll come out with hello mate or whatever, and you think, and you could sense the little disdain for most of the Moose's things. And then I think the other one that they probably all dread turning up is this guy's Gary Cottrell, because he only comes when he's the wolf of the pack, isn't he? You know, when Ange is trying to battle every week and every question's about, you're going to get the sack, up comes Gary Cottrell to stick his teeth in. And you know, you've seen him charge across car parks at Eze. You've seen him chase Eric Ten Hag across car parks, demanding answers from him, dominating a press conference of Amorim and Slot when they were at their previous clubs. Now he's gone to Sweden, pumping Isak when they're trying to talk about Sweden on an international break. So I think Gary Cottrell's probably the least impressive one you want to see turn up on your doorstep.
Well, I mean, all I say is, you know, he gets moments that also we've got to remember with broadcast and on camera, like there can be moments or answers that won't really transcend or translate to like newspapers and the written word, but there can be just a reaction, and transfers are like a prime example of that. You sometimes wonder. Before Spurs, I used to cover Brighton a lot. You think, why are you asking another question of Graham Potter about transfer targets? He never gives anything. But a lot of the time, you know, they've already got their sort of package on whoever the latest transfer target is for Brighton. They need some sort of reactions. That's a prime example. That would do nothing for me. There's no use in it. But and the way Gary gets, you know, moments that are pretty unique and memorable, as you've just sort of pointed out, are sort of, I guess you could argue, a vindication themselves. And one thing I would say about Moose, is there are quite often times where the answers he gets out, whether they're given in a particularly respectful way or what, are actually quite revealing, quite useful. So he's got his own particular way about him. Yeah, I'll give you that. But it's not like, I've been in enough press conferences over the years where people ask point questions that are completely pointless, that offer up nothing. I mean, I sometimes do the tennis and I go to Wimbledon, and oh my good Lord, if you come into these press conferences, particularly with the American journalists, who will be asking about, like, you know, some sort of statistic of someone's second serve percentage. You're like, who is? No one is using these quotes, right? There's no use to anyone. You just want to hear yourself speak. Whereas Moose, quite regularly, and you might notice this now I've mentioned it, whether they like it or not, might actually deliver something that you find that you go, oh, didn't know that. And that's the goal. That's the target. Yeah. That's the way what we're supposed to be doing.
I think it goes back to that point, though. Me and Joe saying this last season, Tom, when you've got your likes of you in there, Ali in there, Tom Olner in there, Dan Kilpatrick at the time, and you're seeing kind of the nationals that come in and ask the same questions every week, you could just see that was really, really grating on the manager, where he was being asked the same questions every single week. And you guys would think, we've heard these before. We're hearing this every week. That is a hard thing when obviously you're there weekly like you are.
No, I get that. And I think with Ange himself, you know, I think he also gets it. Like he gets what we do better than most Premier League managers. I'm led to believe. Like he obviously talked about how much he read stuff. We had Clowngate with Dan. You know, towards the end.
I can tell you, I watched it as well, Tom. From what we heard, and watched it as well.
So like he's well aware, and I think he also gets that, particularly in those sort of down times in the season. Not so much down as in when things are going wrong, but when there's just not a lot to talk about. It's like way away from the transfer window, but we have to write something, and you've got to find something to talk about. Then it gets tricky, and then also you've got all the different kind of remits for each individual organization. Like yes, I write for Spurs fans, but I also, in a way, write more for the national football fan, not as in England, but as in the fan who wants to read a bit about everything rather than just Spurs. So you might get some bit of news for Spurs or a topic that's really specific to Spurs about like the youth team or whatever that won't really work for me, but I can get as Spurs fans is far more interesting than hearing him talk about another thing about Harry Kane when he was there or whatever, when it wasn't, that newsworthy. So that you try, I guess what I'm trying to say is bear that in mind, guys, when you're sort of judging us on what we're doing.
I was just going to ask you, Tom, why is it that Tottenham and a few of the other clubs, have an embargo section as such that comes out at 10 o'clock, but clubs like Forest, Palace, QPRs and all that, they just do a straight session? Why do certain clubs get the embargo part?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I know it's one that completely baffles a lot of fans. They're like, "What is an embargo?" Thinking about ships or something. They don't really get how it works in the media. So the way embargoes are generally done is, particularly in England, compared to somewhere like Germany, where they get to speak to people all the time, go to training all the time, or Italy. I mean, think of when Paratici was there and he used to speak on a weekly basis to the media, and he never did it in England because he didn't have to. We're quite limited in our opportunities to actually speak to people at Spurs or at football clubs, and often it's just the manager, as Ange and Conte made clear at times, particularly Antonio, over how much that frustrated him. And so, but we obviously have got various deadlines, particularly with newspapers, which are obviously still going strong to a certain extent, maybe not as strong as they used to be, where we've got to fill those pages. So rather than come back for another day, we'll have an embargoed section where it'll be like, okay, this stuff will be used at this particular time. So we've got something to fill those pages. Now, it's interesting. I mean, someone like Newcastle, obviously a similar sort of standard, rival, I suppose, to Spurs at the moment. They do their press conference early doors on a Friday, and they don't even have an embargo section. It's just TV out there completely. You could make the case that Spurs could do. I don't want to make this case because I'm kind of cutting off my nose to spite my face, but you could say the same thing, particularly when Spurs are doing press conferences on a Friday, which seems to be generally what they've done, although that might change a bit this season. Maybe, I'm not sure. It depends on when the game is or where they're playing, particularly on Saturday. If they're playing, I don't know this for sure, but I have a sense that if they're playing away from home on a Saturday, there could be a chance it could be Thursday or early on Friday. But anyway, you could say they could do the same thing. But at the moment, and I'm happy to have it because it gives us something different rather than what's out there in the mid-afternoon. Then we have something for later that day. But newspapers are kind of changing. Even My Place, which is probably one of the old, most the last bastions of saving stuff for the newspaper, that this summer specifically is supposed to have changed, and we're more about the immediate now. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it switch at some point.
It's fascinating stuff. Tom, I have to just turn our attention back to the book you've written because, I mean, look, the book itself is culminating in what was an absolutely special night for the club, all of us as fans. Was there ever a season that was more of a roller coaster ride than last season? Tom, in all your time covering not just Tottenham but football in general, when you think of last season with the twists and turns of it, can you think of a season that you've ever seen in football where there's been such those parallels where you go, you're saying you would seriously have conversations about them in a relegation battle, which Jason will vehemently deny. But at the same time, the club go on and win a European trophy, a highly prestigious European trophy. That just kind of sum up how balmy the season was, really.
Yeah, absolutely bonkers. And in my sort of introduction to the way I've done, to give you an idea of how the book works, I've done a sort of relatively short introduction explaining this sort of context behind the season and I guess a bit about who I am and how I've come to this story. And then there's Ange's first season. It's kind of done all in the past tense, and it's quite a long sort of prologue. And then every chapter after that is kind of month by month done in the present tense. So to kind of feel like the idea anyway, whether it's effective enough is up for readers to let me know, I suppose. The idea is to basically take you back into that space as if it's happening right now and relive it for good and for bad, ultimately for good in the end. But I'm sure there are some painful moments throughout that time. But yeah, I mean, in that introduction, I explained, I can't think of anything like it. It's absolutely bonkers. Not at a club like Spurs. I mean, I guess there have been examples of, a Wigan who won the FA Cup and got relegated, but it's not the same, is it? Because Tottenham are one of the bastions of English football. Like this, we think of them as, even if they hadn't won a trophy for such a long time, they're the double winners. They are, the fabric. They're the big six, if that still exists. And for them to have such an awful campaign in the league and have so many sort of mad moments, throughout, whether it be, obviously little moments like Bentancur, or on the eve of the season, Basuma having a club ban over something like, what are you doing? And or Ange having bust-ups with fans and various things, and so many quotes. I know, a lot of these you will have heard before, but to go through them again in the sort of course of time, you sort of go, you stand back and you go, wow, that was a crazy moment. That all led to this feeling that even as someone who's not a Tottenham fan but was lucky enough to be in the San Mamés Stadium, it felt like history. It felt a shared moment that I wanted to capture. That can be something that, whatever happens now, whether this be the pretext to lots of success in the coming years, and everyone goes, wow, that good on Ange getting that first trophy, and they can move on to bigger and better things. Or, and probably more likely, to be honest, as an objective person, just because of the level of competition that Spurs face, it might be a while before they win something again. Who knows? But this will be something that you can never take away, for good or for bad. And that's what I wanted to capture, because I was lucky enough to be pretty much every step of the way of it.
And Tom, a reminder out there for those that want to get the book, it's on pre-order right now. Just tell them when they can find that book.
Yeah, you can find it at a few different places. So it's published by Pitch Publishing, who have done quite a lot of sports books. I know you guys, Ricky in particular, you're aware of their work. So you can find it on their website, but you can also get it on Amazon on pre-order. If you just type in Miracle in Bilbao, I'm sure it will come up. And I think it's out on the 29th of September. So you can go through there. And I don't know how many of the Australian audience are still here. We've still
got a few. I mean, I had half of them on my back last season. They were big Jason McGovern fans. You've still got a few here, I think.
Well, yeah, I was going to say. So, if you give me a second to try and find exactly the area, but I know that one of the guys that I don't know if you ever dealt with him, there's a guy called Jared Waitley. So anyone who's on here, who's an Australian sports fan will know him, because he's a household name over there. As one of the main broadcasters who does a radio show for a radio show called SEN, who I very regularly throughout the season, or every sort of few weeks, he would get me on to talk about how it was going with Ange, and he very kindly read the book himself. So on the back there's a quote from him, and he seemed to be a fan, which was nice. And so I know from my own YouTube, which is at Tom Barkley Journalist, I had a big sort of Australian following. I don't know if they seemed to think that I liked Ange or whatever it was, which I did. So it probably came across. And I do feel I got a lot of messages from them saying, thanks, Tom, but I'm leaving now because there's no reason for me to follow this anymore. So, but for the ones that might still be following this stream and maybe mine generally, if you give me a second, I will find the link for it.
That's fine. I think the ones that are remaining here with us, the Australians, are here to tell us when Frank has got things wrong. You should have kept Ange. You should have kept Ange. Yeah, that was the vibe after the Bournemouth game.
So I found so the website where they're selling it in Australia on pre-order is quite fittingly called sanity.com.au. I don't know if that's like a regular place for books. I'm not sure. I've been given the link, and that's where it will be. So if you guys go on there, hopefully you can pre-order it, and hopefully it can be that cherished memory.
I love that. We'll put all that in our episode description. Tom, we have to ask this quickly, and I'm going to go to Jason as well on this point. Favourite goal of last season for those that want to remember it?
Yeah.
Do you have a favourite European goal in the campaign? Is there one that really stands out?
I do, and it sounds mad to give this one because it's just a penalty. And I've thought of all the goals that we've gone through, and I could have given the one I really liked, from a sort of aesthetic point of view, apart from the finish itself, was was Madders' goal against Bodo at home, because of the way Spurs, they worked their way out of trouble at the back, and then they just burst on the break, and then Porro puts that lovely ball over the top. There you go, another Aussie going to yeah. You probably want to call them Notts, guys, because they don't like that at Forest. They like it at Forest. Notts is Notts County, but no worries. But yeah, it was a lovely ball over the top, and obviously Madders' first touch was brilliant. The finish was a little bit of a scuff, but he got it in and that goal was a reminder of what was possible when Ange ball sort of clicked. But I just remember being in Frankfurt in that deafening stadium, of which I've been to quite a few times now, both with Spurs and England. I think, was it Denmark they played in the Euros? I definitely went to Frankfurt, one of the England games in the Euros. They'll blur a little bit into one, but the noise was incredible, and everything was so on the line in that game. Like, if you remember the press conference beforehand, I was asking, do you know what is going to happen to you next if you don't win this? On reflection,
these were the ones where Jason was saying, "Let's just cut through the noise." These are, I remember this.
Honestly, mate. On reflection and looking back and speaking to sort of sources since, I really do think had he lost that game, he was going to get sacked after that. I'm very sure of that. One of the mentions I make mention in the book is that for a lot of the knockout games, the entire board were at the games for the away games, which I don't think was actually that common. I felt potentially a bit ominous at the time. He obviously got through it, but it was such a stressful match. But the way Madders, again, who obviously he's very sad he's injured at the moment. It's not like everything's gone swimmingly for him at Tottenham, but the way he put his body on the line to win that penalty, where he gets taken out, to my mind, underlined how the players were still playing for the manager at the time, which was something that was reiterated both, publicly, albeit what were they going to say, but also from what I was hearing behind the scenes, they were still loving him. Whether there was, often in these situations, as Ange put it, there would be splintering and fracturing throughout when things start to go pear-shaped, like they definitely were in the league anyway. And the way I just don't think. I mean, look at, I guess, way Forest collapsed the other day when they knew Nuno was probably done. That's normally what you see when teams start to struggle. I'm sure we've seen it many times, like Nuno at Spurs when they lost to Solskjaer's Man United, for example. Many examples. But to put your body on the line like that and to really want it like you did was what was, to my mind, sort of emblematic of the passion they still had and belief in the manager. And then you got the penalty itself. You got Solanke. I think it's more the sort of what makes me remember it so well is probably my journalist hat on. There's so many sort of storylines in and amongst that goal, from the Maddison situation to Ange's future to Spurs' season to Solanke hasn't scored in ages. He goes up for it, and then I didn't realize at the time until like afterwards in watching all the videos and stuff how much Ange genuinely seemed to think Don was which player was it? I forget which player it was, but maybe it was Tell or whoever. I think it might have been Tell was going to take the penalty when that was always going to be a bit of a ruse to let Don take it. But then to have the sort of confidence to finish, it just felt a huge moment in the whole story. And I know it's a penalty and it's not particularly exciting, but for all those reasons, it made me sort of. It was a huge close shave that night, and it sort of gave renewed belief that they could go all the way in this competition.
Yeah, Liam says here, Aussie still here, Spurs fan for life, but originated from Ange. There you go. Some, they come and they stay forever. Jace, you made some really interesting points about the fact you look back at the Europa League campaign. It's easy to forget we started smoothly. We had 3 straight wins against Karabag, Ferencvaros and AZ. And when you kind of move on from that, we know we had those difficult nights against Galatasaray, Roma, Rangers. But also in there was that key win you brought up about against Hoffenheim. How vital that was for securing qualification. Was there one goal or one moment that stood out for you in terms of the whole campaign where you just thought, how important that was?
I just think the Hoffenheim game was huge, because if you remember, we started with the 9 points, but after Rangers, we'd actually fallen out of the top 8. So we're looking set for a playoff. We had to get 4 points from those last 2 games. If we'd have lost in Hoffenheim, we'd have had to go through the playoffs. But when you looked at Hoffenheim, we had 11 fit senior players. That was it. You know, you look at a substitutes bench where we had 4 substitutes not named because we didn't have enough players. And on the bench was Foster, Whiteman, Casanova, Hardy, Olasisi, Moore, Ajayi and Lancashire. And we were literally down to 10 fit senior outfield play. Richie started that game, having not played a game for like 3 months, just about got through a first half. The players were completely flat and exhausted at the end of that game. And going into that game as well, you got to bear in mind, we went into that game on the back of the embarrassment of Tamworth, the back of a North London derby, and 4 days or 3 days, whatever it was after, being 3-0 down at Everton at half-time, and everyone, you included, Rick, going ballistic, saying he's got to go, he's got to go, he's got to go.
I think I even spoke to Tom. I think I even messaged. I said, I have to. That week, I was amazed. And we're still here in the Goodison Park, but, you know, because we were 3-0 down at home to Everton in the first half. Everton couldn't score a goal for love no money. Dominic Calvert-Lewin couldn't score a goal for love no money. And to concede 3 in the first half like that, I thought it was a goner. I mean, how many times, Tom, do you think he was going to be gone? I mean, crazy.
Well,
crazy.
I've sort of alluded to this in the book. I feel like a lot of us were thinking, presuming in February, that was when things would start to go pear-shaped. But I think earlier than that was when decisions may have been made that weren't. And then kind of after the January window, it was kind of locked in, is the sort of information I've got, that he's basically going to stay. And, you know, like I say, if he'd lost him, as soon as the season was over, like Frankfurt, if they'd lost, then I think that would have been it. But until that moment happened, I think they were likely to sort of stick with him at that point. But it's funny you mentioned Hoffenheim, because Sonny talks about that, doesn't he, when he reflected on his season, how he felt, because he scored twice, which was really, you know, kind of sadly the last real major influence he had on the team. I think I can't think of many others after that. He obviously didn't score many more goals in this unbelievable career, but it was an amazing, absolutely essential, crucial offering he gave up to the team that night. I have to say, I was in Hoffenheim, and I didn't think of it in the same way that clearly Jason has explained so well there, how much it was on the line. I think I just thought they're going to beat Elfsborg at home. They're definitely going to beat them at home. Yes, they maybe needed 4 points, so they obviously need to get a result, but it didn't feel sort of all or nothing to me. But I'm clearly, you know, wrong, because look at the way Sonny talks about it being his favourite moment of the whole competition, because he felt that was absolutely enormous. And as Jason pointed out, the absolute sort of inexperience on the bench meant that it was a huge win. And I know Hoffenheim were going through their own disastrous time as it was at the time themselves. You know, going through the book again and going over through all the pieces that I've done throughout the season, you know, as sort of touch points for the book. I remember Andre Kramaric, speaking very outspoken about how do we put it, not sort of great season they'd had so at that point. So, you know, even that, you know, I suppose maybe was in Spurs' favour, but to go and win away from home anywhere in Europe, I still think should be something that should be appreciated, no matter how badly the season's going. But yeah, just, I don't know, just going through it all, there are just so many moments that stand out. And I hope when people read it and relive it, yes, there'll be sort of pain. I would not expect, I would not be surprised to see a bit of skim reading through the middle from a lot of fans when they're like, I cannot take this anymore. Take me to the bit where it gets good. But
you mean from the start right to the end?
Well, put it this way. I knew going in that May was going to be important for this book. So the May chapter, I can tell you now, is the longest one of the lot. I hopefully go into sort of good detail and hopefully get a fresh insight into how he motivated the team, you know, on that day, how it all worked and how they got it over the line. And hopefully bring in some experiences of individual fans, because it was, you know, obviously it was a proper planes, trains and automobiles final. Amazing place. You know, I haven't been to Bilbao before, but it's beautiful, but it's a bit of for me in particular, it was an absolute nightmare to get to. But that's its own story. I hope it's like almost like a cherished memory of that people can take home and dip into whenever they want, particularly if there's a time in the future where things aren't going so well. They can remember when they won a trophy.
Also, Jason, was that made in Tottenham night as well? Go on.
No, I think with the Hoffenheim thing, why it was a concern is because we were down literally to 10 fit senior players. And when you had a bench like that, and if we don't get that result, it's not that we're out of the competition, but you're then going into that playoff round with another 2 games where you're thinking, Christ, we've got Liverpool coming up, Villa's coming up in the cup. We know how that confidence is absolutely rock bottom, completely evaporated in terms of getting a result. There's no belief from any of the supporters we can get one. So to have had to go into a playoff game and get, I don't know, Roma or something like that would have been incredibly difficult for us at that stage. So that's why that win was so big for me, to make sure we didn't get those extra 2 games.
You're right.
Yeah. It's absolutely fascinating. Someone will ask you, because I feel like there's one thing we haven't spoken about is where the manager's gone to next. Can we grab you for 10 minutes or so? Is that all right with yourself? We're getting another Perfect. Look, we're going to go for our next break of the show. Like we said, it was a roller coaster of a season. We didn't quite make it to season 3, but the warning signs were there as to how crazy this season was going to be. And Ange, maybe let us know that. Let's go for our next break and we'll be back after this.
I told them and they laughed. I told them and they didn't believe. But here we are. And we're here because of this unbelievable group of people, players and staff, absolute heroes, led by the legend, Son Heung-min. Cuti Romero, James Madison, and Guillermo Vicario. All of them heroes, and they did it all for you. Because you deserve it. This club deserves it. And I'll tell you something, I'll leave you with this. All the best television series, season 3 is better than season 2. Thank you.
Just honestly, what a football club. I was with Jason on that next to him in that parade. And that day itself, with everything going around, I just remember the beer Jason going absolutely everywhere when Ange delivered that. And I think we all look back now and just, you know what's funny? Even from that moment, how much that has happened with Tottenham from that Ange speech to now has been simply remarkable when you think about not only Ange departing, but Sonny leaving, Romero signing a new contract, having a Super Cup final, you know, the amount of things, Frank coming in, Daniel Levy stepping down. So much has happened in such a little amount of time. I feel like only Tottenham as a club can do what Tottenham do. It's crazy. And now we have to come face to face with the news that we will be facing Ange Postecoglou in this season against Nottingham Forest, where he's joined forces with what seems to be the pantomime villain at the moment of the Spurs fan base in, of course, Evangelos Marinakis. Fascinating, I think, this one, because, again, there's many out there that, you know, again, we're advocating a change. There's many out there that would love to have seen season 3. I mean, I'll just ask you, Jace, how surprised you are to see Ange be appointed as the Nottingham Forest manager, given just, well, I say the sea change and what they're trying to do there. Obviously, it was a squad set up for really a possession, counter-attacking type football. And with Ange, you've got somebody that, you know, again, you loved what Ange embodied in terms of that feeling of wanting to take on the opponent at all costs and being front foot. I'm just intrigued to think how you see that working out for him at Forest and difficulties he might face.
I think if they were going to go for him, they'd have been far better to go for him the day he was sacked from Tottenham, so that he had a summer. I think with any, not just Ange, I think with any manager that's really philosophy minded, if you like, whatever that particular philosophy is, it's really difficult to go in once the season has started and you've lost those key 6 weeks. So, you know, you look at Graham Potter that had a philosophy. He went into Chelsea once the season has started, hasn't worked. Went into West Ham once the season started, hasn't worked. You can look at even Klopp when he went into Liverpool, season 1 at Liverpool, when he went in, what was it, October type of time. There was no great shakes at Liverpool because, you know, the recruitment's not done for that. So however you want that philosophy to be, whether you believe it or not, I think it's really hard. Whereas Maresca has gone into Chelsea, likewise at Leicester with a philosophy in mind. But when he goes into Chelsea, he's got that whole pre-season to work through it. And that starts to show as the season goes on. So for me, if somebody was going to go in from Nuno now, and Mourinho's available from Fenerbahce now, I think Mourinho was a better fit for the Forest job. But to turn them from a pragmatic counter-attack team into a front foot high line team, I think once the season started, that's incredibly difficult. And you know, if Forest have done some of their recruiting, maybe with a view in mind, so they've brought in players like Zinchenko, Amari Hutchinson. If that's the route they were going to go down, then they should have got rid of Nuno. Like I said, once Ange was available and he was there number 1, go for him in. When was Ange sacked? What was the date? 12th of June, 10th of June, something like that, wasn't it?
Around that period, yeah.
I can't remember the date he was sacked, but why waste the 3 months and lose all that key work? So I think it will be difficult for him to get his philosophy through to them. Again, whether you believe it's right or wrong, I just think it's really hard. Amorim, you know, look how difficult it's been for Amorim to get his philosophy into that Manchester United side when he goes in. There was a reason that he didn't want to take that job at the time and said, no, I'll take it in the summer. So I think that's the difficulty for him that he'll have. And of course, he'll be taking over from Nuno, a job that, I mean, he's done an incredible job at Nottingham Forest. I couldn't particularly want to watch Nuno football, but the job that Nuno's done, in fairness, almost everywhere. This is a man that brought Wolves up and took them into Europe. He goes away gets the Tottenham job, and in a weird way, he probably did deserve an upgrade job on what he'd done at Wolves. He's done an amazing job at Wolves. When he leaves Tottenham, he goes to the Saudi League, wins, and people can dismiss the Saudi League, but there's still 4 or 5 teams full of superstars out there. He wins the league in Saudi. He comes back to Forest, where they're struggling, saves Forest from relegation, takes them from 17th into Europe. I mean, his body at work at every club other than Tottenham is really, really strong, Nuno. I've got the utmost respect for Nuno. I think he's a brilliant manager at Premier League, and I think he can walk into another Premier League job, albeit I wouldn't particularly want to watch Nuno's football, and I'm glad he's not Tottenham's manager. But Tottenham won't define Nuno. But for him, the job he's done at Forest is incredible. Absolutely amazing job that Forest have done. You know, we talk about us winning the European trophy for the first time in 40 years. They're going into their first European season for 30 years.
That's crazy.
He's taken Forest to, don't forget, he also took Forest to a FA Cup semi-final as well last season. Yeah. So, you know, he's taken over from somebody that's done an amazing job there. I think it's going to be really hard for him to get that going. But, you know, that's not just because of his football.
Yeah. So I'm going to ask you about, obviously, that appointment itself, Ange going there for an interest. And it's like something to change. Of course, Spurs travel to Forest at the moment on December the 13th, and Postecoglou will return to the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on March the 21st. Again, those dates may change. He signed a 2-year deal at the City Ground. He's going to be officially unveiled on Thursday. I know many are going to be very intrigued to see what he says, what he doesn't say. Will he be asked about his time at Spurs? But look, Marinakis appears to have been an admirer of him. He seems to have been the first choice all along. I mean, this graphic that we're showing here on the screen for those that are watching the show live on our YouTube platform, it just kind of shows you the difference in terms of what he's walking into at Forest and compared to Tottenham in relation to build-up attacks, possession percentages, kilometres covered and sprints. It's a big difference, Tom, in terms of the way Forest are to the way Spurs are. How do you feel he might approach the job, and do you think he can be a success there? And what does success look like for Forest under Ange?
I mean, I'm still buzzing from that parade speech in between. It's reminded me just why I wrote that book, really. That's amazing. look, first of all, with Jason made some really good points about managers coming in within the season, how difficult it's going to be. I would say that, Nuno did sign a new contract at Forest in the summer. That it shows how quickly things have changed.
That's
but
crazy.
I don't think
Is crazy.
Yeah. So it's not like it seems anyway. Why would you hand someone a new? I think it was a 3-year deal if they always plan to sack him very soon. So I think things changed throughout the summer. So best laid plans. Yes, of course. If they knew what they know now regarding Nuno, then they probably would have got rid of him earlier. And then brought Ange in, who's been, to my understanding, ready to go as soon as he left Spurs. He's wanted the Premier League. He's had interest from Saudi Arabia in Al Ahly. He's had interest from LAFC. He's had interest from Bayer Leverkusen to succeed Erik ten Hag, who was there for about 5 minutes. But he wanted the Premier League. I think his family's pretty settled in England after years of moving them around the world. And Forest is a funny one because when Ange left Spurs, we talked a lot on our Tottenham Way podcast. What next for Ange? Can we see him back in the Premier League, and which club? And I was struggling to name one that would make sense, because a team that's of the same kind of standing as Tottenham, say a Newcastle or Aston Villa, presume their job suddenly comes up. It feels too risky. And definitely for clubs above them as well, Man City or Liverpool or whatever, because whatever they're going for, whether it be Champions League qualification or the title, to gamble on someone who lost so many games at as a big club like Tottenham, it feels too risky. If you're a Crystal Palace or a Brentford or a West Ham, where one false move you actually could get sucked into a relegation battle, it seems too risky. Maybe a team that got promoted that are a bit of a free hit, and you could definitely see Ange, with the sort of passion he has for the history of the game, having a bit of being attracted by Leeds if that became available, or even a Sunderland. But then again, would he be interested? Because he has just won the Europa League. So as much as people might, denigrate his Premier League record in the last season, he came 5th the year before and won the Europa League. So I think he's looking for something better than that. And so I was like, I can't really think of it. And then as soon as Forest came on the radar, I was like, that's interesting. And not just because of the Marinakis factor, though obviously that's played a part in this. Because to my mind, their squad's really good. And I don't think they should. No team is too good to go down. And they're obviously in Europe this season. So there is that jeopardy that if it goes completely pear-shaped, like if they have a season like they did for Spurs last year, then they will be in trouble. Anyone would be. It's amazing, really, that Spurs weren't, because of the way the other teams were so bad last season. But I think generally, it's the Forest squad have got some really good players. I watched Elliot Anderson at Villa Park the other day. Yes, it was a pretty terrible game against Andorra, but he was one of the bright sparks. And it's a shame for Newcastle that they had to let him go because of PSR. But maybe they should have sold someone else based on how well he's progressed. I'm not going to go into Morgan Gibbs-White too much because it's probably too painful for Spurs fans. But he's a class act, a really good player. I think Hudson-Odoi. I think there's a number of players that really, really are maybe not top level, but very good Premier League players, and they've recruited well over this time. So if they really want to go for a sort of gear shift in approach and gamble to a certain extent on Ange, I think they are safer to do it than a lot of the other clubs that I've talked about. Because whilst they'll be trying to get into Europe, and obviously Marinakis in his statement today has said now it's time to challenge for trophies. So the bar is obviously set high. I don't think externally there's much expectation that has to happen. Whereas, Spurs miss out on Europe, it's a bit of a crisis because they should be in it. The same for a lot of other clubs. And then, yes, obviously the main question mark is how will he implement his way of playing compared to a very different style under Nuno. First of all, I would slightly disagree with Jason about Nuno last season anyway. I actually thought they were actually quite entertaining for Nuno's style of play. Definitely wasn't at Spurs. I covered Wolves, funny enough, a lot when I used to cover the Football League. That team that went up. I mean, admittedly, it had the late, great Diogo Jota, Ruben Neves. They had unbelievable players for Championship level, but they were brilliant to watch. And I thought Forest last season, albeit in a counter-attacking style, could be really thrilling with Elanga and Gibbs-White and other players. And yes, it will be different, and it'll be hard to bring that in mid-season, as Jason's very eloquently pointed out, the troubles with that and the other managers that have struggled. But actually, when I was going through the sort of squad list of Forest, I don't know. I think there was actually quite a lot of players that could suit the way that everyone seems to be presuming he'll play, which is a big question mark anyway. But say it is the way that Ange played for most of the time at Spurs. I think Anderson, for example, is probably better now, maybe arguably, than any of the other options he had at Spurs to play in that holding midfield. Such a hard position to play on your own, where you've got to try and be press resistant, defend. But if you look at Elliot Anderson's stats it's an early sample size from this season, but he's leading the way or second in the league for loads of different skills, whether it be passing, completed pass in the final third, tackles, all the things you want for that position. Gibbs White I've already alluded to. Jason's already mentioned, Zinchenko, Ola Aina. These are very technically gifted fullbacks. So if he wants to play his inverted fullbacks at essentially number 10, like he used to with Destiny and Porro at times, I think they've got the capability to do that. And actually, Chris Wood, I think actually, when you look at Celtic anyway, under Ange, he actually quite likes a bit of a battering ram, but a poacher finisher up top. And I think actually Chris Wood really fits that profile. But obviously, that's, again, presuming that he's learned nothing from his experience at Spurs, won't change anyway because everyone says he doesn't adapt. I think his time in the Europa League and winning it proves that he can. Whether he will is a different question. I think there's no doubt that if he's to make a success of this, he will have to learn some of the lessons he made, mostly, to my mind, on injuries. And he can argue it to the end, to the cows come home, about his role in the number of Spurs injuries last season. But I just think there's just too many correlations between Ange and the clubs he's been at before, where the number of muscle injuries have increased at that particular club, then there not to be something in that. And if Forest are to sort of be able to fight on all fronts competitively, even with a pretty good big squad, he'll hopefully have to do better than he did from a Spurs perspective. But going through it, I am more optimistic that it can work. Whether I'm saying it's going to is another question.
Jace, quick question on him. What success there for Ange at Forest? Because, like you said earlier, they've been taken into Europe by the manager Nuno after 30 years. Has he got to go and win the European? Has he got to go and win it?
Without being rude, I don't give a flying F how he gets on at Nottingham Forest. I said that in the group today. Just because I wouldn't necessarily have sacked him, people are saying, you've got to move on from him. You've got to move on from him. But we constantly hark back to him. I don't care if Forest are relegated. I don't care if Forest finish runners-up as long as we won the league. I honestly don't care how he gets on. I want our manager.
Yeah.
I want our current manager to produce the type of football that I've been wanting to see at Tottenham for 50 years, not just the last 2. People think because I support it's this crazy word about sexuals. It's like we got 4-year-olds. I mean, people 4-year-olds. I don't want an Ange Postecoglou. I want Bill Nick. I want Arthur Rowe. I want Keith Birkinshaw football. Not what's just been the last 2 years. Move on from it. I don't care if Forest lose. I want Forest to win at the weekend. Of course I do. But then I want anyone to beat that lot.
We all want Forest.
Exactly. But after that, I don't care if we beat them 28-0 or anything. It's just move on from it. Move on from it. But I want this manager to give me a style of football that isn't what I saw at Bournemouth and isn't what I saw for the last 10 minutes of a Super Cup final, and be the manager that everyone tells me that he is. It's not to be what Postecoglou wasn't.
No, it's fair. It's fair. I mean, on that point, Tom, maybe to ask you, what's the big differences you've seen from the pressers so far between Frank and Ange? Have you noticed real big differences already? And again, it's only we're only 3-4 weeks in to a new manager's reign, but have you already noticed key differences in terms of the way you might phrase a question, or you maybe not as worried in terms of the answer you'll get back from Frank? Because I mean, it's all due respect now. I mean, I said to Jason last season, it felt like when you was in those embargo ones and you would go first with the written media questions, it felt like, right, we are going to get some, absolute gold stuff here. So everyone would wait until 10:30 to wait for the embargo section to come out and be like, right, get the popcorn. This could be fun. I feel like, no disrespect to Frank, it's not going to really be like that, I think, with Thomas. I don't know if you're going to get... That's not to do down the embargo section. I'm just not sure if you're going to get massive, crazy headlines that you might well get, of course, if, Ange would have been here for season 3. Not that I would have wanted him here for season 3, but you see where I'm coming from. So what do you think, Tom, in terms of different media styles you've seen so far in those presses between Ange and Frank?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think from a journalist perspective, I'm ever going to get anyone as good as Ange for things like that. I mean, I remember Marcus on the Tottenham Way saying he was never a fan, or became not a fan of his from a managerial point of view, saying he should be, quite harshly saying, he should get a job as Spurs' PR because he's brilliant at that. And I don't completely agree with that, but I know what he means. He's so good with the way he uses his words, and he can, tell a story like anyone else. So I think it's harsh to compare anyone on that front. Having said that, I suppose I've dealt with Thomas Frank quite a lot. He's really personal, likable guy. But from his first press conference, I found him more guarded and maybe even a little bit nervous, more than I was expecting. But I suppose there's such a big difference between the situation he was at Brentford. I mean, first of all, there was never that many journalists in there. I did a few Brentford, pre-match press conferences. It's quite rare they had lots in the room. But also, even when he was at a Spurs, post-match, no one's really looking to get, a really. It's rare that a back page headline is going to come out of Thomas Frank unless a really big event has happened, or some sort of controversy.
Like the chairman leaving.
Yeah, no, but I meant as in when he was at Brentford. So that was the difference. It's just the scope and the scale and the level of interest in Tottenham versus the level of interest in Brentford. I mean, I know from my own journalistic, times of writing about Brighton, writing about Palace, or writing about clubs that were below the Premier League, how much of a battle it is to get decent space in the paper or on websites. You have to really get really interesting stuff. And then you start covering a Tottenham or covering England. It's like we're so fascinated by everything that most of it is newsworthy, whatever it is. So that's the point, is that the scale is different. But I was hoping, and I still am, and I've still seen it to a certain extent. I think he has started to relax a bit more, even in these handful of press conferences we've had so far. I want to see more of that kind of personality that he showed at times at Brentford. I would say that in unveiling press conference, there was a lot of news related questions. I asked a lot of them myself. What's going on with Son? What's going on with Romero? Your answer there suggests they're leaving, or there's no, it's kind of putting people on the spot over difficult situations, which he probably, even if he knew that Son was always going, he couldn't say it there. So what can you say? I would have, liked to have seen a bit more of that personality that we've seen come through, because from a journalist perspective, whilst there's always going to be, news that we're trying and, uncover and reveal to the fans over specific situations, more often than not, we're just looking for something interesting to write about. And if you go in as a manager and give someone a really interesting bit about their backstory we didn't know, or whatever, you can, from a PR perspective, dominate that kind of narrative. And I didn't feel like he really did that in that first press conference. But like I say, it's hard to compare him to the yardstick of Ange, who, would again, coming back to the book, out of nowhere, starts going on about a mole that he's apparently been sitting on for however many months, and decides now that he's going to bring it out. And we're like, what? There are many examples of that. So it's hard to compare, but I think over time, he also will probably get used to the regular faces. I referenced it earlier with Ange sort of slightly mugging me off with that Bournemouth James Maddison thing. And I think he took a year to start to get used to knowing what we're like, what kind of questions we ask. I mean, cynics might say in the second season he needed us more because it wasn't going as well. I'm not saying that's what I think, but I've heard that, people suggest that. I just think he just sort of, you grow. It's human nature. It's like any kind of people, you warm to them the more you get to know them most of the time, or you go the other way if you decide you don't like them. I know Nuno was always, as much as he's done brilliantly in the as a football manager, I think he's actually got better at this. But I remember before Spurs at Wolves, he was hard work.
I remember Ali saying it was really hard to even get a paragraph out of him.
Yeah, Ali found it, and it was during I don't know if that was COVID times as well.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but like he was hard work. And I remember Ruben Neves scoring this unbelievable goal for Wolves against Derby in quite a big championship game. But and he scored this absolute worldie. And can you at least just talk a bit about the goal or about Ruben as a player, because he's really newsworthy, and he just wouldn't want to ever single out individuals, and it was just hard work. But you also got the sense that he didn't really respect us, whether he should or not. But there wasn't a lot of love there. Whereas other managers, Thomas Frank definitely. I just feel like in time he'll start to sort of relax and feel more comfortable. And I think I definitely saw that ahead of the Bournemouth game, and then they go and obviously lose that match. My sort of slight fear from a journalistic perspective is this season has starts to peter out. Spurs was so newsworthy last season for largely for bad reasons, and then in wonderful reasons towards the end, but it was always topical and everybody wanted to hear about it. You didn't have to be a Spurs fan, you wanted to hear about it, and that's why there's so much interest in. I mean, when was the last time you heard this much interest in a Nottingham Forest manager being appointed? It's been ages.
Yes, true.
International break, so there's not a lot else going on, but no one was really talking about England ahead of the Serbia game today. They were talking about Ange being back in the game. Yeah. So if Spurs suddenly, go out of the cups, farewell in the Champions League.
Well,
but then
on that point, I'm very quickly. I know we're pushed for time. Very quickly, me and Jason have been discussing this behind the scenes. Frank doesn't have a great cup record, and Jason, I love my cups. Jason also loves his cups, and he was upset with the last final 10 minutes in the Super Cup in the way it was managed from a game management perspective. Do you think because of Brentford, really the priority has always been there in terms of sustaining a decent league position? There's not really been emphasis on the cups. How important and how do you think he will approach the likes of the Carabao Cup, the FA Cup? Do you think he will understand the true traditions of Tottenham fans of what those trophies meant? Because the one thing with Ange, it seems to be very apparent in that final season, he understood just how much winning a trophy meant. And whatever you think about the way that second season played out, it became apparent that Tottenham couldn't fight on all four fronts, and therefore he targeted the Europa League and went hell for leather for it. So do you feel Frank will understand that very early on about the importance of the cup games? Because again, I think we look back at him, yourself and Jason, I think he hadn't got out of the third or fourth round of the cups for quite a considerable amount of time at Brentford. I mean, they're not a priority there, maybe. I suppose that's the question. How do you think he'll treat them?
Yeah, I think it's hard to look at what he did at Brentford and take it across the Spurs because of the smaller squad and sort of survival being so important. But I would also say with Carabao Cup, for example, when was the last time any Tottenham manager put out a full strength side for the first round at least, or the third round? So I'd imagine to see the same. He's very much talking about reiterating what Levy had said about the need to fight on all four fronts. So he's going to have to manage it. So I've been to so many Carabao Cup games at any level of the competition, but particularly in those early rounds where, 8 changes, 9 changes for each side. They're playing in the Championship. They're like mid-table. It's like, it's just par for the course and something that really winds me up as well. But I just, that's just what everyone seems to do these days. So I'd be delighted to see a different approach. Hopefully he can look at the success that Ange had and what it meant to the Spurs fans and try and deliver that, or seem to have the same approach when it comes to cup competitions, because you can see what it can mean to supporters. Having said that, Ange obviously got sacked, so from a job preservation point of view, But then there's the whole thing. We're wondering what changes now from the club's overall perspective. Now the main man has left, but it's the same ownership but slightly different. Do their priorities change? Do they not? We'll see.
Final question to you both.
What you got to think about, Rick, is that he was sacked in that statement that said we've got to be competitive on all fronts, and you've now got a board that's publicly saying we want to win more and we want to win more often. So you can't afford to go out the cup at home to Plymouth and away at Doncaster and things like that. If you get Liverpool away
Yeah, different
You
story.
know, let's be honest, it's been a nightmare fixture for us for
Yeah.
110 years. Bill Nick never won there. So, you know, I think if you go out at Liverpool, that's one thing, but we can't be being knocked out. Forget even Ange. We can't be getting knocked out by Norwich City at home like we were under Mourinho. We can't be getting knocked out by Sheffield United away like we were under Conte. You know, we can't be going to Colchester like we were under Poch and getting knocked out, because then, you know, you bring more problems on yourself.
Yeah, and we know that with the matchday fans, you know, there's certain requirements at Tottenham, and the cups are such a pivotal thing. I have to ask you guys finally, because it's kind of murmurings around the fact of a potential smudging of a return for Harry Kane. Just a yes or no on this. Do you feel that with Daniel's departure, or I say departure, but the fact Daniel is no longer on the footballing side of the operations, this makes it more doable? We'll start with you, Jace. Yes or no? Harry back?
Maybe more doable for us. It's whether he wants to come back to us, for sure. But I'm still 50-50 over whether I want to see him back. And that's not necessarily on him as a footballer, but do we get Harry back to be the superstar and demands the captain, and I want to take the free kicks and I want to take the penalties and all that? I think if he comes back, it's got to be on our terms, not the terms that I'm only coming back to break the Premier League goal record.
Yeah, I can't imagine him playing for any other club by Tottenham. I just don't know what you think, Tom. Gut feeling, will we see him back at Tottenham?
Well, I can see him playing for another team apart from Spurs. There's a different question. Interesting. Well, because I think he was very keen on Man United before but then the door was closed on going to another English club, and he went to Bayern. So, and obviously Man City was well known. So, so for that reason, it wouldn't surprise me playing for another team. I would not be surprised if he did move on from Bayern at the end of the season with a year left on his contract. I do think Spurs, if they could get him back, should do it, even at his age. I think he's an unbelievable player. I don't think he's ever been the kind of guy who's you know, will demand, I'm going to take the free kicks. Like, yes, he's a striker who's goal scorer, so he's going to be selfish by his very nature. But he seems, by all accounts, you know, a team player, I think. But part of me wonders, you know, does he, not because I've heard anything at all, but, you know, does he follow the Lewandowski route and then goes off to Barcelona and you know, carries it on there? But if Spurs can get him back, I'd absolutely love to see it.
That would feel like a big win for the Lewis family if they brought him back. I just think from the fans' perspective, to have Harry Kane back would be absolutely huge. So about Hughes, Super Spurs is here. The 3 goals against Elfsborg was special, certainly that European journey. Shazad says here, wondering if I have with us as fans is we call Ange a legend for winning us the trophy, yet so many of us talk about him as if he was crap. We wouldn't talk about Pochettino that way. Again, look, it's things again with that where I know some are upset about the mockery of Ange. He won us the European trophy at the end of the day and gave us one of our best weeks in Bilbao, which of course has led to Tom writing the book that he's wrote. Go on, Jace, before we close with Tom.
It's not just he won us a European trophy. He did finish 5th in his first season, and he did qualify us for the Champions League. And if Thomas Frank can tick off the box that's finished 5th, won a trophy, got us in the Champions League, we'll be delighted. But at the moment, those are the things he's got to do.
The remit's set. Tom, you've been an absolute star. It's been a pleasure having you here. Like typical last one of Spurs fashion, we say an hour and then that results in further than an hour. But it has been a real pleasure. Just a final opportunity, Tom, for those that want to get their hands on the book, tell them how they can do that, where they can find that. And of course, all those details as well, which Tom will reference here, will be in our episode description. Tom, let them know where they can find this great book.
A number of places. Thanks, Ricky. So if you go onto Pitch Publishing's website, they're the publishers of the book. You can get it on there. You can get it on Amazon if you just type in Miracle in Bilbao. I'm sure it will come up. For Australian viewers, it's called insanity.com.au, I believe. No, so it's Sanity, not Insanity. Sanity.com.au is the publishers where you can pick it up from. And I believe America... it's not quite yet ready to pre-order, but I think that's coming. I've had a lot of questions about an audio book because obviously a lot of people prefer to listen rather than to read these days. I really hope I get a chance or get some, or, it'd be amazing to have someone famous do it for me. It really is dependent on the success of how it sells, if that gets done or not. I believe it's going to be on ebook as well. But yeah, it comes out later this month, September 29th. I'll be doing lots of stuff on TalkSport about today. I'm sure I'll be doing it on my X account, probably my YouTube, which is at Tom Barkley Journalist, where I do regular stuff after press conferences and matches and random features, as well as you guys know, at the Tottenham Way, the podcast, we do stuff with Marcus, Tom, and George now that Dan has defected to the other side of the Athletic. But George has been unbelievable. I have to say, I know you, Ricky and George, you were really, really good mates anyway. And I've known George for ages.
I've got to say, how to say with Marcus, bless him, whenever I need to go get a steer on how I feel as a fan, Marcus is one of my kind of go-to people. I think, right, that's how he's feeling. Right, I'm not completely out of how I feel, bless him.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think part of our sort of USP to a certain extent is the sort of measured journalists, the guys who are in the room asking the questions, as opposed to stuff like what you guys do, which is unbelievable. And it's kind of, you guys have crowded out the space anyway, so it's nice to have something different. But also, with it being the journalists, a lot of the time, it can be sometimes a little bit too measured. And Marcus is a journalist in his own right, but obviously, when it comes to our pod, more than anything, as well as a presenter, he brings that sort of Tottenham fan passion as well. So I think it works well. And we're on YouTube now for that as well, which is at the Tottenham Way Pod. So check them out.
Tom, you've been a superstar. Like I say, we look forward to catching up with you in probably January, where hopefully we're hitting the heights of being in all the cups and we're competing on all four fronts. We confident on that, Jace?
I was just going to say, hasn't Tom got a free copy to give away?
We have got a free copy to give away. We will be giving away a free copy. And on that point, Jace, thank you for reminding me. We did reference it during the show. So the question we're setting the viewers and the listeners, Tom did mention what his favourite goal was during our Europa League campaign. So if you want to get in your answers to that question, what did Tom say was his favourite goal of Spurs' European campaign, which saw Spurs clinch that trophy in Bilbao? If you can send your answers through to lastwordonspurs@outlook.com. That's lastwordonspurs@outlook.com. You will be given a chance of winning a copy of the book, which is to be released later this month. So like I say, get in touch on our email, and I say you will be selected, or one person will be selected at random, and you'll win a copy of the book. Jace, thank you so much. Jason making it clear there. We're done with the Ange chat. We're moving firmly into the Frank era if we haven't done before. I thought, can I really get away with playing that Ange clip with Jason on here? But I thought we can do it one last time we can. Jace, thank you so much. Tom, thank you, mate. Been a real pleasure. And I guess we'll hear you and we'll see you in Frank's upcoming pressers, where we are turning our attention back to football, which feels it's been a bit of a crazy week, Tom. It's been anything but talking about us on the pitch.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads to talk about next. Friday's presser, we got West Ham away. Mohamed Kudus has returned to London Stadium, which is going to be in its own right a bit of a subplot to talk about. But obviously, the first time Thomas Frank has spoken about Daniel Levy leaving, what he made of that, was he expecting it? So many things. Ange back in a job. Jason won't want to hear his opinions on that because he's moved on, but I imagine it will come up. And anything else we can think of, might throw something left field if I deem appropriate at some point. So I'm sure you guys will follow it on the YouTube channels. Let us know.
Are you teasing us there for the written section, then, Tom, with what you're saying? Are you teasing us to make sure we the written section?
It's funny, sometimes it's quite, not to say, well, what a hard job I've got. It's obviously not that difficult. It's nothing that important.
Well, I think last season felt hard for a lot of you guys in that room.
But do you know what? I found on Antonio, admittedly, this was like early days of me covering Spurs. But when you're doing that embargo section, and because it was early days, I was often like one of the last ones in that little embargo section. Whereas now you probably notice I'm often the one that goes to earlier on because I'm regular.
Yeah.
By the time it comes around to you, you're like, what else is there left to talk about? Like, what is there left to ask? So sometimes that's where the sort of left field questions come up. But yeah, I think we're all still kind of feeling Thomas Frank out a little bit at the moment. There'll be certain things that you notice with Ange that or any manager where they'll be good about talking about certain things, and others, are kind of no-go areas where you're just not going to get a very good answer. And I think personally, I'm still feeling my way with Thomas Frank to work out exactly what works well and what doesn't.
Okay. It's interesting. Listen, again, we'll most certainly see that and feel that across the season. Jace, thank you. I know, Jason, you're happy. Football's back. I think sometimes when you have weeks like this, you kind of forget what we're all here for. We're here for the football, aren't we, Jace? Are we here for the football, Jace? We are, aren't we? Yeah.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Let's get back to watching. I mean, it's a tough game this weekend, isn't it? We know our record at West Ham for a long, long time. It's always a tough game. We know we'll call it their cup final, and we know they'll be up for it. We went into the international break on a absolute horror show. Yeah. They went in on a big high, having had a horrible start to the season. But we know this, as you're right, the kudos story around it. There's so many subplots that it'll be a tough game there. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And we look forward, hopefully, not coming back now until we're on the eve of that game. So listen, a massive thank you to Jace. Tom, thank you ever so much. We'll hear you and see you in that presser on Friday, where hopefully Frank's in a good mood and we're talking about Tottenham being back to hopefully a place where we can get back to winning ways. A reminder, you can find Tom on the Tottenham Way. He is on YouTube as well, at Tom Barkley Journalist. We're going to tag him in so you can follow him via this show as well. And of course, that brilliant book that we've discussed there, The Miracle of Bilbao. Great. Look, we've got Christmas coming up, a great Christmas gift for anyone in the family. It's an easy win, really, isn't it? Who doesn't want to be reminded about Bilbao? Listen, make sure you check that out. All those links in terms of how to purchase the book will be in our episode description. From Jason, from Tom, from me. We have been the last word on Spurs. We will hopefully see you soon. Hopefully not too soon. And as always, thank you so much for your support. And come on, you Spurs.